Thank you very much having this online participation with Dr. Amparo as well as Humberto Calderon, if they are still online. Please, the people that will be moderating this panel, it's Mario López Pérez, which doesn't require any additional introduction. He will be conducting this conversation, will be through questions to these different speakers. So we're a little bit late on time. We'll give priority to people that are online, and that's Dr. Amparo Martínez Arroyo, as well as Humberto Calderón Zúñiga, and also Mario will be representing people, Mario Amparo Martínez Arroyo, who is a researcher of the Institute of Science and Atmosphere in UNAM, Eduardo Batllori. That doesn't require any introduction, but he's ex-minister of urban development in Yucatán, who is in charge of the general program of the National Commission of the State of Mexico, and Humberto Calderón Zúñiga, the Direction of Policies for Climate Change, Minister of Urban Development and Environment of the Government of the State of Tamaulipas. Thank you very much, Mario. The floor is yours, and please make the questions to our speakers, and thank you for the waiting. Amparo, let's begin with you. First, thank you very much for participating in this forum. You were director of the INEG, and you conducted different processes for articulation of the legal Mexican framework in terms of climate change and a lot of about its work. So the question that I want to make for starting this conversation is, what did you left behind regarding adaptation? I saw these works from CONAGUA, from IMTA, all the work that you have made, and that you had a vision for this country. In specific terms for adaptation, what did you left behind? What were the things that you think that you didn't have enough time to do? So 5 minutes, please. First, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I will answer in a very honest way and very brief, because it is difficult in this country and in this moment of climate change and at the moment of the things that are happening to pretend that I was even able to use enough time for this. So the things that I left behind were basically everything, or everything about consolidating fixing the institutional commitment of to answer in the way that I want to answer to climate change, that it's in a completely integral way, and with the characteristics that it should have, this attention or this focus in a local way, because then it wouldn't be adaptation, right? And there are different things that we could start that right now are on its way. I was gonna talk about them a little bit, but that it's the possibility to make projections to the different impacts on each area, because to be able to decide where we can adapt ourselves, we need to get to know what are the different likely scenarios that are not exactly the ones that we know, and that sometimes we can establish them in a very simple way, as that we're going to have more of the same things. And it's not exactly like that. And mostly that if we don't make a planning, or if we don't adopt an integral perspective, including natural pressures and social pressures and economic pressures, it's difficult to get to good conclusions. There's also some sort of, I mean, some sort of agreement with water that you always have in these forums that are very rich and that they always give us this emotion to see what's next in this generation of knowledge and work and perspectives. But that this doesn't matter if we stop coming to the forums for 10 years or 5 years, or we always find that the problems are repetitive, that the recommendations are repetitive, which is not bad. I mean, they are always a lot, and the backgrounds are always even worse every time. So this makes that the things that we left behind are an organization or a mechanism for participation, for citizen participation in accordance with the organizations and the institutions, federal and state organization, municipal organizations for investigations and government research. This part of how we can perform all the actions that have to be taken. They have been part, I mean, I will not cover all of this or something new in this, but what I would like to mention regarding this and the adaptation is that we haven't achieved, like in water, the policies regarding climate change, not enough to really, the adaptation scenario can be really in the plans that are implemented on each of the places, and that every time it's more dominant with climate change in conditions characterized by a great heterogeneity with time and space, with different levels of uncertainty, which really accepts the complexity in planification, in planning. So I will speak further other topics, but the acceleration that we are living here with climate change, in with some data that we have faced recently in Mexico about what's going on regarding the climate, I think what sticks to me the most, and that we're trying to make it now with some things that I will talk a little bit further, it's to inform in a multi-sector way. If not, we don't do it with all these sectors. We cannot keep analyzing the solutions in a more specific and isolated manner with all the topics, even if such a transversal way to do it, like issues with water, we would have to start now to get what we know from Mexico and for Mexico for the next years. And that's what we're trying to do now with the academy in a group that we have formed to make periodic forms and the climate change topics about this, including biodiversity, water, climate, research, and all these topics that have to be part of them together. That's my first part. Yeah, there will be another round of questions. I make the same question to our colleague in the state of Yucatan, but in a state level, you were at the front of a very important institution, and with the vision to climate change, what was missing, and what did you think was missing for you to keep doing it, and why? Maybe a third period, a third term, right? Because it was first the coordination to make the programs for this change. I was lucky enough to be part of. Can you get closer to the mic, please? Yeah, with the delegation, practically with Semarnat at the moment. And we were lucky enough to foster national disagreements between governors. I think that was one of the very important points to have a regional vision for climate change, establishing three areas, national regional fund where the three public state universities are in charge of, along with TNC, and the route map for adaptation and the network reduction by degradation and deforestation, that more than the carbon footprint was the rural form and how we can improve the rural improvement topic. And this allowed to push through the three states in a very coordinated way actions. Each of them make their own program for climate change, for climate change state, and allow to work on issues regarding mitigation, but basically actions for adapting ourselves and for the relocation of households that were established on high-risk areas in the coast, in the shore, the restoration of the sand line and the beach by the increase and the problems of degradation that were in part of the shores, the region problems that they had, the problem for pollution that we have. We have a great water tank, but we are changing them in a large place for the households have their own land showers and not even water plants. There are 30 water plants that are working at 5 liters per second. So it's tremendous. I mean, for a very high cost. And only in Merida, outside Merida, there's no any other water plant, any treatment plant for treating water with fat or the mixtamal water, among others. So all those things are wasted on the different parts of the or in material banks. So there was a lot of an investment in the activity in the small and medium farms derived from the fall of the NKN that they started operating in more than 40 agriculture parts. Some of them were channeled to different economic activities like the work with pigs. There were not any type of, so we work with them. The big ones are still stubborn to have treatment plants, but it is a point that we need to keep insisting. The fractioners of the household investors doing these small treatment plants, but they're still missing some inactivity. There's a big project that was made for Merida that unfortunately with the change of the government was stopped. And I think that change had also very significant inclusions for the continuity of a lot of projects. We also worked on sanitary field up. We started working with agrochemicals and phosphorates in order to establish different ways for recollection and push agricultural ecologic projects. The construction of the closing of different diversities of more than 13, 14 wastelands in the most important cities. We didn't work with methane, but we did it with the sanitation and improvement. The cleaning of cenotes. You don't know how much things we can find in cenotes. The cenote was the excuse to work in more widened aspects that could allow to join wellness from different organisms to push cleaning processes, but deforestation and the process of recovering and leakages in the cenotes, and the vision and outside cleaning that were in agricultural areas, working with farmers for the use of agrochemicals in urban areas with improvement of ecological baths in areas close to these cenotes. So they were working around more than 150 cenotes at that moment. The fundings were flowing because there was the Environment Commission in the branch 16, where through the INAE, we were able to work directly with the Chamber of Deputies to obtain resources. Once this was dropped, it was very difficult to negotiate with Semarnat and with the changes of the head of the departments. It was very difficult to keep working with these processes and with the heads of the departments. But we left this vision for pushing to sanitization and restoration of watersheds, and also for working in areas from in sur of and the south of the country where there are a series of hills and valleys where there are very terrible floods. Currently, we foster through the system of the basins a regional program for it. And one of the fundamental points that I think it's breaking a myth is that in Yucatan or that in Peninsula there's an excess of water. And the way of measuring this, I mean, there's a presentation for this, but if you want it, I mean, you can check it out, where how Conagua calculates the water availability at the level of the peninsula. So we make the calculation, we still have 3,000 million of square kilometers to offer. So that's why we give the welcome to the breweries or the companies that use a large amount of water. But when we do it for a geological location, because the precipitation is not homogenic and the characteristics are not homogenic, or the different symmetries or the different aspects that are needed, it turns out that we need to harmonize with the administration borders. There are 9 units for planning, which some of them there's no more water availability in this ring of cenotes in the area of the north of Quintana Roo, at the south of Yucatan. There's no more availability, and we are captivating water from the natural discharges that are happening. And this is a very basic point between the quality of the environment and the conservation of biodiversity, particularly with the coast, with shore, and with the reduction of pollutants. So the thing with climate change, we have these dryness sometimes, but we have rains and very heavy rains. We have 120 floods where we increased up to 20.5 in the by the amount of 5 meters was flooded with the fluorine of the fecal matter and different agrochemicals and fungus. We hope to take we have more than 40 days with temperatures more than 40 degrees. So the water balance has been very negative, and the natural discharges have been less. The salt interface, I mean, because sweet water, I mean, relies on salt water. And what we're preventing for 2050 with the Mayan train, we have waters of overexploitation that are being reducing the levels, increasing the salt interface penetrating on the seawater, and the salt process will be one of the important points, and the concentration of pollutants. So in a close future in the peninsula of Yucatan, it will be very, very affected because there are 3 groups of water: the sulfated, and that is not drinkable, it's not usable; the carbonate laxicinated, that it's in the medium and low parts of the basin; and the chlorinated water, that it's the 3 million cubic kilometers are part of these parts of water that are not usable. So there's a lot of work to do, and we have some things that are calculated in the program for the regional actions. We're still missing to strengthen the financing, the fundings for the Council of the Basin and the auxiliary bodies and the organisms for water with much more participation. So we need to improve these councils. I think that's my contribution.
Claro que sí, muchas gracias, Eduardo. Muchos problemas, pues, propiamente.
Yeah, but several problems in Yucatan, in the peninsula. And yes, indeed, what you're saying, the vision that we have not only for all the Mexicans, not all the planners in the center, but they are just saying, go to Southwest. Well, that's not the right way to follow, because it's not well known and it hasn't been advertised enough. Okay, let's go to the state of Mexico now and to merge it with the government of the state in its function, in its work, currently, in terms of adaptation to climate change. Which ones do you consider are the top three priorities, are the most important ones to attend? And how should we address them? How should the state of Mexico address them? Well, firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. And well, it is a topic with the state of Mexico is a huge challenge. We know that in Mexico, in the country, it's very complex regarding water, but as you mentioned in the beginning with the Mexico state, it's very related to the problematic of the Kutsamala system, that it's just a part of the state because we have 125 municipalities by which I always defend them, not only the ones implying the Kutsamala system. We have a system with lack of education where we obviously need to implement as a new policy of the state, a new paradigm, in a vision of a new paradigm. We are in a transition. We are with the creation of a Ministry of Water, which is taking a lot of work. Yes.
But this jump, it's difficult to take, however, not impossible. So, what are the first three things? Public policy management is difficult and complex because we do not have that interaction from the federation. We said we are like in the middle, municipalities or organizations of indigenous peoples and things like that, which is something that we are betting on. So we need a plan and a public policy that's different to work as a team, and that's what we are aiming to do. And then in this water governance, we want to include our communities. Most of our projects, and we see that in the country, are not operational in many senses because we do not take into account citizen participation. And it's relevant to do so, to talk about governance and this intersecretarial articulation. It's essential. There have been isolated actions, intentions, and that doesn't really reflect much. We are not making a lot of progress right now in the state. We are preparing this sectorial plan independent from the state plan for development. We have some colleagues here from the state. I'm glad they are here. And it's been difficult, but it is essential. We know that the basins and the water management depends on a high basin. So let's talk about revegetation, not reforestation. There are good examples, and I hope that we can interact in order to implement all of these. The water subject it has to be tailor-made. It's not like copying what other basins are doing, but we can take some ideas, and that's what we are trying to do in this sectorial plan. We are working with different ministries, with different organizations, groups of citizens that are organized, independent from the government representatives and officials that sometimes we only have like commitment, but not really relevant things that will actually transcend. We have talked about in operational treatment plans, what can we do to make them work? It's not just setting up a plant because they just don't have the resources to operate it. So we want to transcend into water regeneration, which is part of a policy that's not established in Mexico and it's difficult to achieve. It's also a cultural thing, but with systems based on nature. But also we should understand that we should recover all the resources, all of the waste. And this should be not just the water thing, and like I am the director of the program, and that's it. And only I deal with pollution. And what about organic or solid waste? That affects. So we should have an articulation, different actions, integration, different proposals for a real sustainability, not just environmental, but economical, social, cultural. Otherwise, we won't make any progress. So we will recover those resources from what we all can contribute, not just an environmental benefit. Otherwise, we won't, unfortunately, we won't notice. And we need to have these economic resource. There are a lot of resources, even from liquid waste, and obviously this comes with these policies.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Siguiente pregunta, Amparo.
Next question, Amparo.
Estuviste durante mucho tiempo en el
You have been in INEC. You generated a lot of knowledge and information. What were the main barriers that you found yourself with for implementing public policies for adaptation?
Gracias. Mira, bueno, voy a tratar de resumirlo de alguna manera.
I will try to summarize it. I wasn't very prepared to talk about this. I was really focused on many things that we are doing now, but I will try to reply to that, although I have to say that I am eliminating some things, and I think that one of those things that have been the most difficult have been to finding the way to apply knowledge in public officials. And this is not just about communication, it's about culture, it's about institutional arrangement to make it happen. And I think that these models that are compartmentalized to deal with these problems have been diluted. For example, this experience that I remember, which was quite positive, of planning, regional planning, Yucatán, where the states working, although the coordination was not as much as it was expected. But I think that most obstacles were in terms of the complexity, the structural complexity, all the organisms, sub-organisms that have made all of these decisions so diluted with all of these responsibilities. It's not that I think that they should be centralized or totally centralized, but I think that there are mechanisms that should be clear in each item on the way. For example, what we see now with climate change, we see an increase in evaporation. What we calculated before, now it has a lot of loss. We kind of knew that 2/3 of what we received in our territory would be evaporated. But now it turns out that it's more polluted than expected, and there's also an acceleration of this type of a phenomena like evaporation. So we also have the change in precipitation, which is heterogeneous along the country in the north, but especially the different periods where we see it happen have changed. So facing this knowledge that we see on one hand and what we see in the territory that is not necessarily connected, and that's not a problem. They are not always connected because we have to consider the decisions, and usually we have a short-term landscape that allow you, well, make it difficult for you to implement. And this is because the organization of our budget is always in function to the problems on the short term. They're so sectorial that you can fix something. For example, you can try to fix one part, for example, water treatment, or how you will distribute it for a certain region. But on the other hand, in agriculture and in other sectors, this is not being promoted to have that waste of water that would totally change the landscape. To solve this in agriculture. So most obstacles have to do with a lack of joint effort, and I think that the best way to figure this out is in the territory and treat it with these regional intermunicipal coordinations even that allow you to do it, but at the same time linked to the large budgets. So I think that this thing about discussing how the planning can go so climate change can become a relevant element in the equation, not just with scenarios on one hand, and also with actions that have to respond to the problematic on the short term. So we have to see how we can make this work together. So in that sense, the part that they said, for example, in these cases that were discussed about the recovery of the lagoon of La Piedad and what is being done in Sonora or in Tamaulipas on the peninsula of Yucatan. I think that these are paths that we have to follow, but we have to make sure, we have to ensure the full support of federal academic levels and research, and also from the fact that it doesn't depend exclusively on the will of the local authorities or temporal authorities. So something that was an obstacle in general terms were the environmental monitoring systems that were very weak, not consistent, and that are very isolated. Strengthening the monitoring systems, national, and to make them accessible locally, regionally, that would facilitate a lot of the things that are being done, but they should be like biodiversity, ecosystems, as well as all the coastal areas and marine areas, because oftentimes there are wonderful plans, local plans that have not enough information, not consistent enough information, all of these things, and they have to aim to what we have in each place. So, well, that's how we act nationally with this lack of information. So, strengthening the monitoring systems and a better knowledge, and this can be done by Pronatura with this government changes that we are having, and with this forum that have been very rich, these dialogues that would focus on making dossiers about all the different successful projects that happen everywhere, and also to be more aware about those projects that are not working. And I'm not going to repeat myself, but we are aware of all these issues in infrastructure and investment, so we should avoid that. So we have to find how to provide this national information in a cross-cutting way and be more consistent and reliable with the actions that take place locally. So I think also the fact that this is done in a more equitable way, in a more equal way, because some areas have more information than others. And I think that would make us make more progress in terms of informed adaptation. Thank you, Amparo. Eduardo. Same question. What problems have you faced in order to do your job in terms of adaptation? I think that one of the issues is this sectorial fixation on public policies. It's very difficult to work really in an intersectorial way, and that each sector can really take note and develop their own part without saying, this is what I do, this is what I'm going to do. And in the case of the cenotes, there was a large working table, and then tourism left and promoted tourism there and allowing a lot of strange things, and there's no doctor checking like infections and things like that in terms of tourism. But I think that's the point of being intersectorial, and also the lack of information. It's important. You have to be looking in international journals and find information, because there's a lack of connection between universities and centers with the regional problem. This comes from the very problems of the own region. So I think that one of the essential things here is how to achieve this perfecting of these organisms that already exist, so they can work together in an intersectorial way with more accuracy in working with the territory and not by sector, and from the plan of the different states, or adopting regionalization as a working plan, and not so much with intersectorial perspective, and how to connect research centers in interdisciplinary work, not multidisciplinary, but interdisciplinary, where the object of study is the same. Working through the complexity of complex systems to insert a group working in the evaluation and in a horizontal way, together with the Council of Basins or the different auxiliary bodies, with an interdisciplinary team that work on the evaluation of public policy with this sectorized perspective, but also looking down in a transpersonal collaborative way with the communities to get the public policies from the bottom to the top. And I think that that interface of what's working on the top, the different dependencies, that also lead to many issues in human rights. For example, ancestral practices of what it means for, because they extract wood for their homes, and Profepa stops those actions, and there are fines. If they get extract carbon, they also go after them. There are Mexican regulations for all of these things, so it affects artisans and traditional physicians. And this also allows the conservation of the forest. This comprehensive way, they start selling their land. Around 180,000 hectares are being sold a year. So this fragmentation, this loss will make things more complicated when we try to deal with these topics. So if we cannot build an important structural change, at least on a regional level, we should, and these councils of basins should, and also the Regional Commission for Climate Change should make it more dynamic, to give them more budgets and not to be trying to get something here and something there, and to have a timely, real-time monitoring so the users can see on the screen what the water quality is. We have a chemical issue, a lot of pesticides, women with cancer, lactating women that have pesticides in their milk. So we see a lot of kids with cancer, with heavy metals as well. We should be in an environmental contingency stage now, to gather all the resources that are necessary to promote the sanitation and to promote processes for development and sustainability when it comes to water. It's very critical now, and it's also about human resources and human rights. Well, you talk about the elephant in the room, the thing about pollution in Mexico, because first, there's no information, and it's not connected to public health. There's no data. There's a lack of intersectorial perspective of all of these. The impact of pollution, and it's part of the strategy of the EU, what I was saying in the morning, of ensuring that there's enough water of a good quality to face climate change, to adapt to climate change. So we're going in the opposite way of what we should be doing to adapt. We keep on contaminating, and we don't realize that we are doing it. In the peninsula, it's very evident because of the geological characteristics, but it's still critical for the rest of the country. So, state of Mexico. In the state of Mexico, you have a lot of problems, just as they do in Yucatan. But in the end, the question is, it is difficult to articulate the national bar with the state, and on a municipal level, even less. So how can we achieve this in the state of Mexico? I understand this process, this transition process with the Ministry of Water and all of that, but we cannot stop ourselves. What can we do to connect the national part with the state on a state level and municipal level in terms of adaptation? And I said in the intervention that the important part was from the subnational, it would go to a national level, so the NDC of Mexico could collect all of these problems that you have and the commitments that Mexico would have to take. Yes, precisely. That's the most complex part, as Eduardo said. This intersectorial work between egos and jealousy. We have laws from the Constitution, human right to water, but are the obligations and responsibilities of citizens? We don't have that, or we want to skip them. We have a state law for water. We have a planning law in the state of Mexico, as Amparo was saying, about planning, regulation for planning, climate change law. We have a regulation about it, but are we really applying it? It is really important to update things. I think it's an essential time for us in this change of administration, where we should really, I mean, it's crucial because it provides the opportunity to explore new possibilities. Our Ministry of Water has been very insistent in this change of paradigm. This is a good time to have relationship with many states. And as Laura was saying, I mean, Mexico City, but it's not just Mexico City. We belong to the same water body that covers Morelos, Puebla, Hidalgo. So it's crucial that there are alternatives now for discussion, but we need to have a large array that will cover all the different stakeholders. This paradigm change implies not only transformation in the way we conceive and manage water, but it also covers a comprehensive approach, as we said before, to relate all the aspects, including contamination. That's the most important part, with a holistic view that will allow us to approach the challenges that we have now, incorporating innovative practices with a culture change, a vision change, and sustainable this management of that's why we want to reiterate that in this governmental change, this means a great opportunity. So from the basics, from the indigenous communities, from the original peoples, can generate this strategy and establish the public policies, and even municipal, because we are not articulated with the municipalities. Ministry of Water will generate the human right to water perspective, which implies a large job, and will participate a lot in this collaborative strategy of co-responsibility. Thank you very much. Last question, very short answer, please. Amparo, how can we make more visible the policy of adaptation on a state level, on a federal level? Well, first of all, with an explicit recognition in the national plan of the government and binding it to the development plans of the country. When we are talking about adaptation to climate change, we are talking about long periods and processes that are, it's not like it starts and then it ends. I mean, adaptation is an ongoing process. First thing is to eliminate the lack of information or ignorance about what's going to happen, your vulnerability. Secondly, to reduce your risk and to start seeing what can you do in the future, and that has different stages. If this is not integrated in a general plan, these long-term strategies it's really difficult to have access to it. Also, what I think that is more important is this articulation that we were talking about, that it shouldn't be based on sectorial perspective, and if it is, then it should be on what type of projects on a municipal level, how it will be landed, and by topic, but by project. So I think it's more about articulating the plans that are being done on state and municipal level in terms of climate change with those that are being done for the development of the country.
Gracias, Amparo. Eduardo, la misma
Thank you, Amparo. Eduardo, same question. Yes, I think that this offers a lot of resistance for self-management and local development. And I don't even want to imagine the problems they see in the state of Mexico when it comes to water, because water is federal and drinking water is municipal. So the state only has some bodies there. And not even hydro-agricultural. I mean, that's on Sagarpa's side. So if we see the budget gaps in terms of water, drinking, and for the control of the aquifers, the only one that has enough budget is the agricultural part. The other one is more scarce. So I think that the political will of the governor has a lot to do. Convincing and undertaking these actions based on a plan that can foresee the current risks and the future risk in terms of climate change, and strengthening the state councils for civil protection, Senapred, and all of those institutions that are working, that seem to be on their own side, doing their own thing. The municipality, the federation, the state, they are doing different things. They don't speak to each other. And in the organisms of social, I mean, the users of water, the assemblies of users, some of them are representing themselves and not like the whole sector. So we still have a lot to do, but we need the political will, because each plan needs to be aligned with the national programs. Otherwise, I mean, we won't have budget. And also the fact that the budget actually exists to undertake these actions. It's not just having the plan and that's it. The plan looks really good, but how to operate it, the financing. 80% of the resources that get to the state are for like current spending, and some is left for federal programs with federal resources, and their own resources are not enough to carry out actions. So if there's no vision from the head of the government, truly convinced, to make it more institutionalized and make the necessary changes in the structural way of the government, in the constitutions, then not a lot will be achieved if we want a substantial change in this process. And connecting research centers in the development of analysis and synthesis of the information generated.
Thank you. Complementing a little bit with talking about resources, that the resources that arrive are not, it is very limited. That's why we need to look for recovering resources from an integration of the waste management. And it's very still focused to a very structured system. We are very straight to activist models, and we are very concerned about that. And the things that are important is that it is a work between the state and municipality authorities along with their assistant groups and their organization groups from the civil society and citizens. That's quite basic, which implies to have education campaigns, training, sensibilization campaigns. We need to be sensitive to this correct management of resources and challenges in facing climate change. As my coworker was saying, we were just talking about mitigating, but we don't do anything against it, adaptation. But the worst thing is what we're doing or what we're not doing, because we talk about that saying climate change, it's guilty of it, but who has made this? Who has provoked it? So from analyzing what we're doing, what we are not doing, how we are responsible for the things that are happening here, this training program is not only about getting to a group of the society. As my colleagues were saying, it's about articulating institutions for teaching college levels or high school levels with like tomorrow, very important, with a very interesting level with children and young people. There are just a few times where we involve them, which I think will be great. I have some history about it. I since I was 7 years old, I'm in photos appearing building dams and different points. So it's about this thing about saying, I struggled, doing this, so I take care of it even more. It goes in that sense about the citizen participation, also establishing a coordination between all the organisms to cover all the areas. And I would like to read a small summary that we need to have specific points to assess points for supplying, human, agricultural, and recreational, the pollution index and permissible regulations according to its usage, and strengthening governance strategies. There has to be a great campaign for education and information, obligating to report the quality of the waters that are not reportedly permanently. We do it once in a while, but it's not monitoring a water network. We make a measurement just once in a while, and it has to be permanent. Obviously, the problems with old pipelines that we are all aware of it from a very long time. For knowledge of the population, incentives of the resources, and the people understand that governance is not only about demanding the governments to provide resources or to solve the problems. It's also about that all the parts of the chain have to be involved, that the companies and the decision makers also participate, because there's this trend about, as somebody was saying, about these large companies. Sometimes I get, well, this foundation, and I was like, there's a conflict, that yes, I'm part of it. Yes, I accept that resource. And another issue, and my last comment, the lack of information. I'm not saying ignorance, but it's a lack of information about how we can manage funds. State governments are very limited or very stuck in just one current expense or in federal funds. But why cannot we go further? As my coworker was saying, also the private sector, where let's explore without being abusive with these funds, but they are participative and they are part of a circular economy for water, where there can be a win-win for everyone. Thank you. As a wrap up of what we have listened, in order to achieve that the subnational level may have better visibility in terms of adaptation to climate change, the challenges are huge, because the problems that we are facing for adapting ourselves are big, and our legal framework is not complete. We have a problem that is not about privacy or privacy. It's about a national structure, about the articulation of the national public policies, sector, regional policies, even as they are established by established regulation 9674. But we cannot get coordinated, we cannot get into an agreement. And the information, as they were saying, Margarita and Eduardo, we need to have information in order to make better decisions, but we also need to have information in order to know how to captate more funds. So I just would like to thank Amparo, Margarita, and Eduardo for your participation, and we close this panel. Thank you very much.